Prologue. The night sky was dark and brooding. The clouds were moving quickly, as if late for an appointment on the other side of the planet. Atraxi thought he saw shapes in the clouds, but there were no signs of a ship. He spent his time staring out of the window and playing with the old amulet. He ran the chain through his hands and looked at the design. Atraxi had waited. He hadn't slept for 2 days. He sat in the detention room. Apart from the Capitol guards who had escorted him to the cell, he had seen no one since his return. He coughed. His body ached, and he had a high temperature. He looked into the mirror. He saw an old man. His face had been burnt, and his expression was that of a tortured soul. The eternal war was over. They had stood alone in the galaxy, and they had won. He was the sole survivor. The armies had been annihilated. Even Lyala Hamajetsu, their great general, had died. But legends would never grow about the warriors' heroic deeds during the dark times. The monsters were not dead. He had returned to warn his people, if it wasn't too late. Gallifrey had changed. Rassilon's single-minded will had transformed the world. The warriors had been gone for over 1,000 years. They had fought a war across the length of the galaxy. In that time, religion had been abolished, and rational science had been restored as the centre of their law. He knew that it was a mistake. As if science could explain away the monsters. They had just appeared. Science did not offer a glorious future. He had returned, expecting a hero's welcome. But the people had forgotten the warriors. The plague had ravaged Gallifrey. The scientists had done nothing to prevent it. Only a few survived. Many of the politicians, the lawgivers, and the great leaders were dead. He rushed over to the sink. He vomited again. The insides of his stomach were bleeding. The pain tormented him. He had to see Rassilon. They had to prepare. The battle was over, but the war would continue. The monsters would be back. One day. He held the amulet and kissed it. The pain. He opened his eyes. He must have passed out. A figure stood over him. It wore a protective radiation cloak and mask to aid breathing. It had difficulty making itself understood. It was using a translator device developed, like much of their new science, to fight the bloodthirsty war with the monsters. The figure towered over him, and he felt no warmth or friendliness. "I need to speak to Rassilon," Atraxi said. "Why?" the figure replied, a broken and sore voice. "It isn't over." The machinery crackled. He couldn't make out the response. "I am the only survivor," Atraxi continued. It was so cold in the room, he could hardly breathe. "He must listen to me. We fought a war. We won at great cost. We averted a threat far bigger than anyone had contemplated." He lost the sense of his thoughts. "I'm not thinking straight. I feel ill." "You are dying," said the voice. "Only death and destruction hold dominion in this realm." "Who are you?" Atraxi asked. He couldn't stand up. The figure unwrapped a layer of cloth from around its mask. The mask was shattered and had been damaged beyond repair. The cloth kept it together and prevented unwanted bacteria and radioactive dust getting in. The figure slowly and painfully removed the mask. The man stared. It couldn't be. It couldn't possibly be. He coughed up blood. He shouted, "Help! There must be someone around to hear." The figure knelt down beside him. "You shall not die alone." Atraxi was shivering. He couldn't keep warm. He couldn't grip any more. The amulet fell from his hands. "Please, give it back to me," he begged. He needed it for protection. His body began to shake uncontrollably. He stared at the figure's eyes that had seen so much suffering. The figure picked up the amulet and ran his fingers over the design. "Evil," Against evil, the figure said, clasping the amulet in his hand. The figure held him tightly and began to utter a prayer. Atraxi screamed, a long final howl of despair.